welcome to everybody joining us here today for the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're just talking about the new British Prime Minister. His wife is Jewish.
Our favorite redhead is here.
That's right. Welcome, Genevieve. Welcome, David, Ron, Flossie, Arlene, Eva, and Michael. And we're here to celebrate, of course, the summer. David was giving us a nice rundown on British politics, although I will mention, whether you like the Prime Minister or not, it's the first, what do they call the first lady in England, David?
I don't think there's actually a phrase for it.
So it's like in America, you still may like the first lady or the first husband if you do not like the president or prime minister. So hopefully she'll be very popular either way.
She's very bright. I think there'll be a popular couple. There'll be a much higher level of competence. I think it makes a difference, obviously, with the rise in anti-Semitism here. He has really worked to combat that, and he got rid of a lot of people in the Labour Party who were sort of the strongest anti-Semites. It seems like this week the bigger concern about is what's happening in France with left-wing Mélenchon, who's quite anti-Semitic, it seems.
And how do they get along?
They haven't really had much contact. I think that Starmer is showing himself to be relatively conventional. He's already focused on NATO. I think he'll do his own thing.
Okay, well, hopefully it'll go smoothly.
Yeah.
And if not, oh well.
Certainly a lot of attention here is being paid to the U.S. Political situation, where there seems to be general concern about both candidates, obviously.
Yeah, we'll see how that turns out. Hopefully it'll turn out for the best. Every country, a strong country is going to be strong no matter the president. So hopefully that's the case. So we are going to let's discuss something else. But do you think, I'll just go on, do you think her being prime minister's wife will help the Jewish community or make it more different?
I think it will help. I think people are feeling a bit of comfort that, he's embedded in the community somewhat, and he has taken a fair amount of abuse already for support of Israel and criticism of anti-Israeli demonstrations. So I do think it will help.
And so that's Israel's one thing. Also, we know that always impacts it. But it's having good relation with the Jewish community. Hopefully that'll translate beyond just their own party.
Yep.
I don't know the politics very well there, so I did know that the new prime minister's wife is Jewish, though, so I'm at least up on something.
Well, no, and it's been put out there, and he's talked about trying to take Friday nights off, and the importance of tradition in the family. So he's putting it out there.
Okay. All right. Well, let's pray for the best. And
Yes.
And did you get to vote? You don't have to tell us you vote. Do you get to vote when you're over there?
Oh, I did vote. Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if you qualified to vote. So that's awesome.
No. I got my passport in 2004, so I like voting. Everywhere. So I did vote.
That's great. I mean, I appreciate it. I wasn't sure why I got one vote for Prime Minister of England, but I thank you now. I assume it was you. So thank you again for that show of support. That was awesome. All right.
Vote early, vote often.
That's right.
Yes.
I'm trying to be the only person ever to be president of the United States and simultaneously Prime Minister of England. That's my goal.
Well, just quickly, the one thing that was weird back in 2000 with the hanging Chads controversy is that we had an address in Florida then, and I actually voted by absentee ballot in that district, I guess, whatever it was, Palm Beach County, and I voted by absentee ballot. And then I got a second absentee ballot. I could have voted a second time. And I thought, well, I can't really do that. That's wrong. So I didn't do it. But that's the one where every vote was counted. So I think I would have committed a felony if I had voted twice. But I didn't do it.
Yeah, but
That's good because if he got caught, you wouldn't be able to come on Wednesdays.
That's right.
no, but he's a smart guy. He wouldn't have got caught. I think he could have got away with it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the subject of today, although it's much more interesting. If I think next week, if we want to get a more detailed analysis of the Jewish situation in France and England, David, if you wouldn't mind, just we could talk a little bit about that. I hear things. Actually,
Sure.
just talk to somebody who was in England. You hear about the dire situation in France of the Jews. The chief rabbi or one of the lead Orthodox rabbis of France recently said this is not a country for Jews anymore. So we'll see what happens. And you're seeing, we'll hear a little bit about that in England. And then, of course, Germany, which has been much more supportive of the Jewish community. You're also hearing some rumblings now, which is unfortunate. But what we're going to talk about today, coincidentally in some ways, but not in others, is we want to talk about leaders who have and their relationships with the Jewish community. And so I thought we'd start off with, of course, the presidents, go through some of the presidents and what their relationship was with the Jewish community, who did what first, mostly positive stuff, especially with the more recent stuff. I don't want to get too political with the campaign running right now. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of the Jewish relationship with American presidents. We've talked about a few. We talked about Nixon and Truman, so we won't go too much into that. Obviously, we talked about Margaret Thatcher a little bit. Thank you to David. We talked about Winston Churchill. But let's go down the list of American presidents, see what people know. I just have little ditties about each one. And for those of you who don't know, the first American president was George Washington. Okay. Maybe news to everybody. He was pretty popular at the time. George Washington. Very popular.
Rabbi, we know all that because we don't live in southern Texas.
Oh, that's right. South Texas, we don't realize that. That's hurtful, Ron. It's true, but hurtful.
Well, like you say, it's a joke.
That's right. It was absolutely. So Washington, and we'll just go over little things. You guys may know more. I just looked up some little things that each did. Washington, obviously, the most famous president of all time, wrote letters to 6 congregations. We are one of them. We were the first letter. He visited Touro Synagogue when he was promoting the Bill of Rights. Easily the most popular president, I'm sure, by reputation. And he spoke often about freedom of religion. He did speak about the merits of being Jewish. And so, Jews weren't being placed in cabinet positions during his time period, but Washington was, definitely very supportive of the Jewish community in many ways. And so we'll see other presidents who did much more, but he, just by sending letters to 6 Jewish congregations, all 6 of them, he sent letters to every single Jewish congregation. Of course, we all sent letters first to him. And the Touro letter obviously became very popular. Ours is better. The second president of the United States was John Adams. If you haven't read the book, really one of the great biographies of all time, I think. They were doing all those great presidential biographies 15, 20, 30 years ago, and his came out and was amazing. Obviously became a mini series. So very magnanimous towards the Jewish people, talking about how much we have done for the world. He was someone who spoke Hebrew. I don't know exactly how good. I mean, again, modern Hebrew at that time was kind of prosaic in many ways because it was before really they started the idea of bringing out Hebrew, but he probably spoke a mixture of, biblical Hebrew, and he was friends with Mordechai Manuel Noah, who was a very important Jewish diplomat of the age. who had very strong relations with Adams and also Jefferson. Adams also wrote, although I think after he was president, that he was supportive of a possibility of a Jewish state in the future. Obviously, this is 18 teens, 1820s, way before Zionism, way before even Montefiore went there, way before Herzl, and he was already supportive of a Jewish state. So it's amazing, and it's not amazing, but I think one of the reasons the Jews have done so well in America is for the time period, the leadership was way ahead of what other countries did, in terms of Jewish, Iran. Yes.
Now, what was the reason why he was so progressive in his thoughts, going back to the early 1800s?
Well, well, I think one, you have to understand that, sorry, that America was the land of the Bible in many respects, but they were very Old Testament centric. I think a lot of America was anti-Europe in that we were very Old Testament, freedom for others to a degree that you didn't see in Europe. There was a belief that the hierarchical system in Europe was the antithesis of what they were searching for in America. That's why many of the people who came to America came for religious freedom, but they also came here because there was a rigid structure to life in Europe, and there wasn't one in America. So if you're at the lower edge, or you're intellectual and you can't move up, or you're a third son, this was the place. And I think they were all very appreciative of what they found here. And reading what they read in what they considered the Old Testament so often, I think they really felt some sort of kinship. I think also there was a very small Jewish community. We're talking during his presidency, I'm guessing 4,000 or 5,000 maybe. And so it wasn't a huge number. And so with a small number of people, you also tend to be much more supportive. When Jews went to small towns, they were generally very supported because there was a small number. It's not until you have the large number of Jews coming into America in the 1880s that you start to really see the overt anti-Semitism that had really not been here in that way. And that's because there were so many and it was looked at as competition. I think Jews had a reputation of being persecuted even at that age. And America was founded as a place for the persecuted, not counting African Americans, unfortunately. And I think that was instrumental in creating this country. And I think Adams and all the presidents who were really part of the early phase of creating America, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Monroe, and Madison all had that feeling to a degree. Flossie, maybe not Monroe as much. Flossie.
John Adams also had a dynamic wife, Abigail.
Yes, and that I don't know what her relationship was. Do you know? Obviously, one of the all-time great, if not the, probably her and Eleanor Roosevelt would be considered two of the greatest first ladies. There's others. I think in the modern age, the first lady has taken on even more importance, but she set the tone very early, obviously. John Adams obviously was an incredible human being in terms of what he accomplished, very supportive. Obviously, the next president would be even more famous than him, and that would be Thomas Jefferson. Obviously, they didn't get along very well until both were retired the last 10 years of their lives, where they ended up being very close. July 4th, as a big day in American history, a lot of it has to do with, and then 1820s, how they were writing each other, talking about nobody remembers it. It's not a big deal. People are forgetting how important that really brought July 4th to becoming the. So what did Jefferson do? Well, obviously, he wrote, I believe he's the author of the First Amendment, which to the Constitution, or at least one of the authors, which is, of course, the no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, but that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinion in matters of religion. So obviously, this was years before he was president, 10 years-ish. And the most important piece of legislation, I don't know if it's considered legislation, the most important political piece ever written in the history of the Jewish world, even more than probably the Declaration of Independence. So just writing that alone, or being part of the writing of that, would put him to the top in our eyes. He was the first president to appoint somebody Jewish to a federal post. U.S. Marshal in Maryland, a guy named Reuben Edding of Baltimore. So that's also pretty impressive. He was also pen pals with the same person who Madison was, Mordechai Emanuel Noah. And I think you learn a lot about leaders, not only by the legislation or what they do, but who are they friends with? Who are they buddies with? And at that age, you were buddies with people mostly through mail. If they obviously was so hard. So in letter writing, as we know back then, was an art. So if he is regularly writing somebody who is a Jewish diplomat and writing very nice things, that's okay. And I think it's beautiful. He also helped create the ability for Jews to become citizens in Virginia before we completed the war. So really, he did quite a bit. I don't have, James, we're not going to do all of them. Monroe wasn't always considered as much as supportive. Mostly, he didn't do very much for the Jews, but also he didn't get along with the diplomat Noah, which was, one of the things that. So we'll go on to James Madison, who is the first U.S. president to appoint a Jew to a foreign diplomatic post. And guess who it was? Mordechai Noah. So this man, who is not as well known for, I don't know why, he should be more, but he is the first Jew to be appointed to a foreign diplomatic post. He was the ambassador to Tunis during the time of Madison. Obviously, Madison is a very important character in our history, as he wrote the Constitution, or was the main writer. He also, like Adams, was pretty well versed in Hebrew. He was not as overtly supportive, but not anti. Adams wrote a lot about Judaism, and I think Thomas Jefferson did as well. Madison didn't write as much about it, but he certainly was, pretty supportive as far as we go. John Quincy Adams wrote a letter to Mordechai Emanuel Noah. So what we should probably do is the next session do it on who is Mordechai Noah, because he was friends with at least 3 presidents and possibly enemies with one. Not only that, he was friends with Adams and Jefferson, who were not friends with each other during that time period. So obviously we should probably talk about him. Martin Van Buren, who is, again, we're getting to the presidents who aren't as well known. He was the first president to order an American consul to intervene on behalf of Jews abroad. So he helped protect Jews in Egypt in the 1840s from persecution. It's known as the Damascus Affair. So this is a really monumental moment that not only supporting the Jews within your country, but actively trying to help Jews abroad. And so that is really his most famous moment in the Jewish world. His Secretary of State was also very supportive of that. John Tyler, first president to, I should probably write the dates, 1841 president, first president to nominate a U.S. consul to Palestine, Gordon Cresson, who was actually, believe it or not, a convert. One of the most famous converts in early American history, Gordon Cresson. He was a Quaker and became Jewish, went to Israel as a consul for America, which of course was Palestine. It was under the Ottoman Turks at the time. And he helped establish a farming colony there before the modern Zionism. He's actually buried in Israel in Mount Olives. Yes, Flossie.
What is his name again?
His name was Cresson, Cresson, Warden Cresson.
You know, Rabbi, Michael is having a fit because you don't see his hand up.
I'm sorry, Michael. I don't see.
Oh,
where's Michael?
I'm very calm, Ron.
Michael, we
what I'm
don't
gonna
want you to
say-
have a fit. Please.
What I'm going to say was relevant, 5 minutes ago. I'm just going to toss this out. Possibly everybody knows this, but Adams and Jefferson died the same day, July 4th. I assume everybody. I shouldn't assume everybody knows this, but it's a fairly well-known thing. And one of John Adams' last words was, "Thomas Jefferson lives."
Yeah.
And in fact, I think I don't remember. I think Jefferson died a few minutes after.
Yeah, I think he died just shortly after.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Did Adams really know he lived, or because they're writing letters, or because that's
Well, I think he would have known had Jefferson died. So
So
he made the assumption that Jefferson was
still alive because he hadn't heard, right?
Yeah.
So, and
Anyway.
that is one of the great, you say moments, but the fact that they both died on July 4th,
Yeah.
their letters to each other became so famous and so influential. Millard Fillmore, who's I know Michael's favorite all-time president.
Oh, yes.
What did he do? He did something very famous. He offered to place Judah P. Benjamin on the Supreme Court. There will not be a Jewish Supreme Court justice for 60 years, but he offered it to Judah P. Benjamin, who was a senator in Louisiana. Judah P. Benjamin declined it. Did he offer it to him so he would keep him quiet from all his activities? As we know, he would be one of the leaders of the Confederacy. He was the only Confederate leader to actually leave America and never come back. So he was offered he could have been the first U.S. Supreme Court justice who was Jewish. Franklin Pierce has his name on the charter of a synagogue. So that is pretty impressive. The first synagogue in DC, Washington Hebrew Congregation, which is still there, he is on the charter because he signed an act of Congress. Also, first Jewish American diplomat to the post of U.S. Minister to The Hague, August Belmont. So we're seeing a lot of people doing little things here and there. What we don't see often is a lot of presidents doing really anti-Semitic things, like overtly things. We just have not seen a lot of that, almost never, which is great. Some are more supportive than others. Some, like Nixon, have been caught on tape saying things they shouldn't. Obviously, all of these presidents could have easily said things on that were not recorded. Ron?
When I was growing up in New York, we always had American history and European history. we learned a lot. Never did they ever mention anything that these presidents did for the Jews.
Right, but they also hopefully didn't mention anything they did against the Jews.
That's very good. You're right.
So now we'll come to Lincoln. We're going to talk a little bit more Lincoln because obviously he has some famous relationships. We'll talk a little bit about what he did and a little bit about him. He was the first president to include Jewish rabbis as chaplains in the military to make sure the military allowed it. He appointed the first Jewish chaplain. He also revoked General Grant's order of number 11, which was so infamous, which expelling Jews from Tennessee, which he had been told that Jews were trying to do subversive things. He also supported, in theory, the idea. Yes, Flossie.
Who was this? Which president are you talking about now?
Lincoln. So while Grant was the general, was a general in the Civil War, he famously had been told that the Jews were being subversive. There's a whole story to it. And so he issued an order which expelled all Jews from Tennessee. Really the only time this has happened. Abraham immediately, when he heard about it, revoked it. Obviously, Grant, as we'll talk a little bit more, Grant got a lot of negative press at the time and certainly later. But he ended up being fairly supportive of the Jewish community and really regretted what he did, at least overtly. Now, as for Abraham Lincoln, he was very much a Bible, especially Old Testament, quoting president. He quoted the Old Testament more often in his letters than he did the New Testament. He used the story of Moses hitting the rock as an example for chiding generals who were doing what he didn't think were losing their gusto or their. He had probably the first president that had a lot of Jewish friends. He grew up close to a Jewish community and actually had buddies who were Jewish. And so one of them was Julius Hammerslow, who had owned a store in nearby where he was growing up, helped him. Before we became friends, he helped Lincoln be elected to the state legislature. I think he was supportive president of the organization Hammerslow was in charge of, one of the Hebrew assistance programs. So at a time when Jews were viewed suspiciously by a lot of people, Lincoln actually had Jewish people come over and be guests at the White House with him. So whereas some of the other presidents were very supportive and may have had dealings with Noah and other ones, Lincoln actually socialized with them. And Abraham Jonas may have been his best friend or one of his very best friends, who basically was the one who convinced him to run for president. So Lincoln had a different relationship with the Jewish community than a lot of the other ones. So he spoke with this man a lot during the Civil War, before the Civil War, took his advice, and was really, really, really close. I mean, he actually died just before Lincoln was shot, but it was really, so that sets Lincoln apart in the early years. So he also appointed Jews to various posts, not the high posts, but he did have wartime appointments of them for lieutenant, for other officers. He ensured that Jewish officers were promoted. He ensured that there were a lot of Jews. He really felt that Jews should be in one position, and that was quartermaster. So for whatever reason, maybe because he felt Jews were very organized or very honest. He made more Jews quartermaster than put Jews in any American president put Jews in any position. He had over 50 Jews in the position of quartermaster. That is pretty unusual. So it shows of his trust and his belief. And so that's he intervened when he heard a Jewish soldier was about to be shot for desertion, wanting to make sure what was going on. And so the fact that he would intervene for a desertion case during the Civil War is pretty amazing. He had people in his cabinet who were not very happy with Lincoln's support of the Jewish community. There were some who even, and as we know, there were one or two who liked to threaten to leave their position and eventually let one do it. Threatened to even leave if he didn't stop supporting the Jewish community so much, and obviously he ignored him. Isaac Mayer Weiss, who was the founder of Reform Judaism, was a supporter of his, and so, which really, matters to us because he founded Reform Judaism. He tried to form an American Judaism. So that was, and he was also very appreciative of the military chaplain program. So Lincoln was really supported by the Jewish community in so many ways, and he supported him as well. Yes, Flossie.
What is a quartermaster?
A quartermaster is the person who organizes all of the stuff. Where are these uniforms going? Where are these arms going? Where it's the person who makes sure everything goes to the place it needs. I'm not a military person, but that's all I know about them. You're right. Am I right? They're the inventory people. So they do not become famous like generals, but within the military, they are very important as anybody else, because they're the ones who ensure the supplies get everywhere they're supposed to. They're the ones who, when the general comes to the quartermaster and says, I need this and this, and the quartermaster has the power to say, sorry, you can't have that right now. We need it somewhere else. So it is a very influential, powerful position. Probably everybody hates you, but you have to be super organized and you have to know everything, what's going on. So that's probably,
I guess so.
I'm sorry?
I was just gonna also, in the Navy, I guess the quartermaster step on track.
And in the Navy, the quartermaster what?
Keeps the ship on track.
It keeps the ship on track, exactly. And that's what they do. So it's really somebody who is just an organizational. And again, there's other little things. When Lincoln was shot, one of the doctors who treated him was a Jewish doctor. He made sure that when they telegraphed the Emancipation Proclamation everywhere, that there was at least one or two Jewish men who were the ones who were doing the telegraphing. So really, probably maybe the most supportive Jewish president of the Jewish community in terms of compared to the rest of the country. Like these days, we've seen a lot of the presidents are very supportive. Most of them are. But the country is much more supportive of the Jewish community, even though despite the anti-Semitism. So it's not, today for a Jew to be elected senator or put on the Supreme Court, no, most people are not going to criticize the move because the person's Jewish. They're going to criticize the move because they don't like the person, don't think the person is capable, or on the other political party. But rarely you're going to see somebody upset that a Jewish person because they don't think a Jewish person is capable. That is just not the case anymore, and thank goodness, although that may change. All right, so we're running a little short. So Grant, obviously, now Grant is the most famous thing Grant ever did concerning the Jewish community is what we talked about. And that is, kind of the stain on his reputation for doing that. But he was the first president to appoint a lead ambassador. He really supported laws against anti-Semitism and was really very supportive of the Jewish community once he became president. I don't know if it's out of guilt or he felt like he had been taken advantage of, but his reputation as being anti-Jewish, most authors disagree with the exception of that really terrible order, which is, I think it was a stain on his reputation for the rest of his life, and he really realized it later. Because even people who didn't necessarily support the Jewish community, the idea of kicking all Jews out of a place was really abhorrent to most people at that time. So really was. Rutherford, we'll keep going. Any questions or thoughts? So Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the president immediately following Grant, guaranteed the right for us to observe the Sabbath, and made sure that was legally binding. So people who took days off from the Sabbath where they were supposed to work, they couldn't be fired because religiously. He, I think, refused to be inaugurated on Saturday as well. First president to appoint ambassador to Egypt was James Garfield. Obviously, he did very little for the Jewish community because he died his first year in office, so he did very little for anybody while in office. Chester Arthur, who became president immediately after his death, was the helped support the Red Cross by putting Jews in office there. He petitioned Russia after the Tsar was assassinated in 1881, and this is not well known, but he actually petitioned the new Russian Tsar to allow Jews to immigrate to America. He was encouraging Jewish immigration to America after the assassination. It didn't happen, but he was very supportive of it. So we'll go through a little bit faster for some of these. Grover Cleveland, who was the only president, and that may change this year, but he's the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, I believe. He served, but supported Jews abroad. And so there was a discrimination issue in Austria where one of the minister was asked to step down because his wife was Jewish, and Grover Cleveland actually stepped in to protest that. It actually helped out, which was really an amazing thing. He also vetoed laws that would have limited non-Christian immigration to America. So in the 1880s, again, the immigration laws were very lenient in America till really 1921 and really ending in 1924. And he's one of the ones who helped Jews immigrate by refusing to sign that kind of legislation. So if that legislation had been signed, then the millions of Jews who came to America would probably been not able to have that many come in. Benjamin Harrison, the president in between, really didn't do a lot, but he did appoint a special commission to travel to Russia to help support the Jews because of the anti-Semitism going on there. Any questions so far? These are just little things. We'll get to some of the major presidents, but really, it's really incredible to see. I mean, there's some presidents who've done things that were considered against the Jews in the Jewish community way, but overtly, very rarely. McKinley, as we know, was the first president to be at the laying of a cornerstone when they built a new Washington Hebrew congregation. He actually went there and wrote and spoke. First treasurer of Puerto Rico. Now we'll come to Theodore Roosevelt, who obviously very famous president for many things. He was probably the most interesting of all the presidents. I mean, while his life was probably the most interesting of any president, almost any human being, all he did in his life, he was not a career politician by any stretch of the imagination. He appointed a Jew to his cabinet to become Secretary of Commerce and Labor. He also won the Nobel Peace Prize and used some of the money to contribute to the National Jewish Welfare Board, which is really amazing that he used his own funds to support the Jewish community. So that was amazing. I don't know if he was the first. He may have been. I think he was. I thought Taft was. Maybe he was the first to put a Jewish person in his cabinet. No, that came later. So he was, again, an incredible human being, and the first president to appoint a Jewish person to a cabinet position. How amazing that must have been. You think about it, there had been no Jew at a cabinet position. It was not illegal, but probably just assumed that it could not be done. And so he set the precedent by doing that. He also had Jews who were Rough Riders with him. And really tried to ensure, there was also a law they tried to put on the books to put, if you were on your passport, that you were Jewish. And he abolished that, which, again, anytime you have your passport labeled as something different, that means you're treated differently. So another man who's way up there on the list of who supported the Jewish community, and probably, except for David, who's on here, had one of the most interesting lives of anybody I've ever heard of. So as you can see, this will just go a little bit faster. William Taft, first president to attend a Seder. First president to speak at a Jewish synagogue during services. And the first president to appoint a Jew to the highest position in the Navy of Rear Admiral. So that is, now what Woodrow Wilson did obviously is very famous, because Judah P. Benjamin could have been the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, but we all know the first Supreme Court justice was Louis Brandeis, and that was Woodrow Wilson who appointed him during his presidency. He was president, obviously, during World War I, 1913, 1921. He supported philanthropic campaigns for Jews. He was a supporter of the Balfour Declaration and the support of the future Israel. He was friends with Stephen Wise, who was probably the most well-known Jewish person, or certainly rabbi and proponent for Israel of the age. Brandeis, as we all know, was a very big Zionist as well. So Woodrow Wilson was way up there as well. So we have a few more minutes. Anybody have anything? We can finish this next week, or we can keep. Do you guys want to continue? Because it gets kind of long now I think about it. Michael.
Well, Wilson's kind of an interesting person in that regard, because he was never considered very sympathetic to Negroes at the time. And of course, as president of Princeton, he wasn't very receptive to Jewish admissions.
Right.
So, so you have a kind of a mixed picture of him. I thought maybe you were a little too laudatory of his position.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just talking mostly about the positive stuff today.
Right.
We're not gonna do as much of the negative. A lot of presidents did things that would be considered anti-Semitic today. Would they have been at the time? Almost all the Ivy schools were not allowing Jews in, or had very restricted policies. in that period, almost every school in America, the major, all had restrictions. Obviously, it was a little bit easier for Jews to circumvent the restrictions because, many of us at the time looked like everybody else. So there were very strict restrictions on almost all the major colleges at the time. And that goes all the way to the 50s and even 60s, and really probably now again today, to be perfectly honest, that seems to be coming again. So you're right. He, along with others, did this as I love, one of my favorite stories. And I actually met somebody who, Albert Einstein was at Princeton, obviously the most famous, scientist in the world. And every freshman class that came in, he would invite the Jews, the small amount of Jews, to come to dinner, I think. And the first thing he would say is, "Why are you here? They don't want you here. You should go to colleges where they want you." And that's what he used to tell the freshmen. And I actually met one freshman who actually got to sit with him, and that's the first thing he said. So that was I have that on actual. It's not just in books. Somebody actually I knew who did that. So you're right. There's always going to be these levels of restrictions were inherent in society at the time. Jews could not go into banking. Only a small number of Jews percentage could go into the medical field. Jews couldn't live in certain places. Jews couldn't be part of country clubs. Jews couldn't be in certain organizational clubs like Rotaries and a lot of places. So there were still a lot of restrictions, but as we must remember, you cannot compare that age to today in any way. I mean, just think about women didn't have the right to vote at this time. Segregation was still, it wasn't even talked about being, there wasn't even a thought of ending segregation yet. It was a very different time, and the level of restrictions placed on Jews were minimal compared to what Jews faced in other countries and compared to what other people faced as well. And if you were Italian or Latino or, from, in some places Catholic, you had a lot of restrictions placed on you as well. So we have to remember that when we look at this. So, but you're right. There are these, and also sometimes people they say things in broad perspectives. There's no Jewish Americans, there's only Americans, but at the same time, they can compartmentalize that people need to be still restricted in places. So it's just the human brain. Now we'll finish with
I was at
Genevieve.
at a youth football league game. This was like a year ago with my girls, and a Christian mother came up to me, and she came to me and was like, there's only 2 religions in the world. I was like, what? And she goes, Christianity and everything else. And I was like, I'm going to walk away now because I don't know what to say to you.
And so far, there's still people like this. I was at a comedy set. There were 3 Jews in a row here, and somebody came up to one of the comedians and said, "You were hilarious." He said, "I don't like Jews, but you were hilarious." Ron.
Yeah,
Well, he didn't say it to me. He said to one of the other comedians. Ron.
to answer your question, I find this very, very interesting, and it would be great if we could continue this in the next session.
Yeah, we're going to continue it because we'll finish here. We finished with Woodrow Wilson, and we'll continue on from there. As we get closer, obviously, I'm not going to say anything negative about. I'll only say positives about the people who are running for president today, but there are many. So Arlene, just to let you know, Arlene, I couldn't hear you. I apologize. Arlene?
Yeah, when I was growing up in the town next to Ridgewood, there was a sign when you came
We lost
into the town. no dogs or Jews allowed.
Yeah.
And I remember it. That was the sign said for years.
And you could have signs
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
I didn't know.
And it was not up. Now, we also have to remember in the 1900s, most Jews could care less about these things. I mean, either a high percentage of Jews were either coming from Eastern Europe or were parents were coming from Eastern Europe. And so to come to a place where it says no Jews served, or you can't live in this neighborhood, or you can't go to this club, or you can't go to college in the numbers you want, that was not a big deal. I mean, it was not. I mean, the fact that you could live at your house and people weren't going to come and conscript you into the military or come and take away all your stuff or kill you or taunt you or abuse you physically. I mean, this is now today it's a big deal. Like we've been in America, we've here, but back then it was like, who cares? For most people, they wanted to, it's called gentleman's agreement. Let's keep it under the, when they tried to stop the gentleman's agreement, a lot of the Jewish community wanted to keep it because when you have a gentleman's agreement, you're not rocking the boat. It's like when I was in Kenya in the 1990s, there was no anti-gay movement at all. There was nothing anti-LGBTQ in Kenya. Why? Because gentleman's agreement. Don't promote yourself. Don't announce yourself. Don't overtly say I'm gay and run for politics. It doesn't matter what you do behind the scenes. Nobody cared. It's only when people started to look for rights. Which again, obviously, the gentleman's agreement was still in effect in America until the 1950s, really, even later. All right, so we'll finish with Flossie.
I've heard the name gentleman's agreement for the name of the movie.
Right.
Was that a phrase used beforehand?
I think it was. That was a phrase I believe was used before. I can look that up. That's a good point. I know a lot about that movie.
That was my dad's policy. That was my dad's policy on the whole thing.
Yeah. Let me just look that up.
Yeah, my dad used to say that. I was raised by my dad more than my mother, and my dad would say that.
Oh, I got it here. In 1907, it was an informal agreement between the U.S. and Japan. Japan would not issue passports to laborers coming to America, and the U.S. would not impose restrictions on Japanese immigrants already in the country. All right, so that's what it was. Very interesting. America said, we won't say anything if you don't send any more Japanese. We've got enough already, and we will not persecute the Japanese here. So, all right, so we're going to finish here. Next week, we will start talking about the Jewish community. We'll start with probably the most popular presidents of all time. Of course, Hubert Hoover. We'll talk about him. And you guys stay safe. Don't forget, if you're able to drive on Friday nights, 5:30, we'll have a pre-neg and then a service honoring Chris Solis, who of course died in Afghanistan and won the Medal of Honor, Congressional Medal of Honor. I'm going to do that annually. And then Saturday is, of course, our anniversary service. So please come to that. See you guys next Wednesday, everybody. Stay safe, and thank you for joining us.